Hey guys, in today's video, this is a little bit something special, a little bit something different. We started a new kind of tier for our climber tier on Metafy, and this was a roundtable discussion about a matchup between Amethyst Steel and Sapphire Steel, featuring myself and TFM Melissa breaking down the matchup, just kind of talking through the deck list as it currently is for us, and discussing like a real in-depth discussion of the lines going through this particular matchup. This is a matchup that was played in the finals of the TFM 3K a couple weekends ago between Melissa and Orion. Shout out to both those players for allowing us to use this footage to kind of teach everyone in our Metafy tier exactly how much better they can be and learn from some of the better players being in their minds and having this live access to them. That's really what the Metafy climb tier is about. When you join the Metafy, it'll be in the pinned comments below. You get access to all of our guides for free, and you get access to a private Discord where it is 100% access to the team, asking questions, asking about deck lists, trying to get better at Disney Lorcana. If those things are interesting to you and you like this video, click that pinned comment below and join the climb today. Enjoy the video.
Okay, this is the latest deck list that I have put together for Amethyst Steel. I believe it's either 2 or 3 cards off of what I played in the 3K, which is one of the videos we're going to be watching. The idea here is we're kind of an aggressive version of Amethyst Steel. So we have 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 1-drops. We have Timothy Mouse, who helps us to be aggressive because of the fact that with evasive characters, he can quest for 2. I recently dropped the Calhouns down from a 3 count to a 2 count. The reason for that is with a little bit less aggro in the meta for the past week and a half, she's not really the best 2-drop because it's like awkward to turn her sideways, and if she doesn't have anything to swing into and gain lore, then it's kind of just like, why are we playing her? And she sits there. Black Heron's great because we love stats. Doc is remaining at a 3 of because there are matchups where we want to be able to kind of refill our hand and go wide, and Doc is the perfect way to do that. Cheshire Cat and Cobra remain kind of at the counts they were at. Cheshire is really a bell on a body, is how I like to describe him. Boosting really lets us kind of move damage. The fact that he is a 3/4 lets him hold damage, as well as Lexington's, Cobra's, Timothy Mouse, Palace Guards. Like, we have so many bodies who can kind of swing and hold damage that they kind of combo really nicely together. A recent change that I've made is upping the white rose count. I think, one, having a 3/3 is kind of important, but more importantly, we want more kind of burn aspects to be able to close out games. And I know that when I was on stream and when I was playing in the 3K event, I often closed games with Cobra and Rose, and I just wanted more of it. So instead of it being a 1 of, I have upped it to a 3 of. Tinkerbell remains just because sometimes we need to be aggressive. She quests for 2. Evasives can be challenging to answer when we have Dumbos and Tinkerbells and Genies. So it's just like, if you answer it, then you might not be able to answer my Dumbo. If you answer my Tinkerbell, you might not be able to answer my Genie. Lexington, I think, is fine, so I kept him in there. Like, he's very powerful in the sense that he can swing into Genies and the fact that he is a 4/4, but obviously he has the downside of not always being able to ready. So don't want him at a 4 of, but definitely want him to be seen. The Demona I kept in there just because stats are really important. People get really afraid of a 4/6 with Challenger because it can take a lot of things out. So I just kind of have it in there for people to respect. Dumbos and Genies will remain just because we need ways to draw cards, and they're just very good cards, in my opinion. And then kind of moving on to the top end, Elsa remains at a 4 of, and Hades and Demona will remain at 3 and 2 respectively. Hades, I think, is a card that like we'll get into as we're watching games, but he is just either removes a threat or draws you cards, and quite frankly, both of those are good, so there's no reason not to have him. If he's not relevant, he is inkable, so we can ink him. And Demona helps us refill our hand or exert characters when we need to. Most notable, you'll see the one of Thunderbolt is no longer in here. It just felt like the worst card in the deck and didn't really have a place. So we're going to try without it for now.
Okay, so with that, I'm going to take the deck list away and kind of hit play on the media, but I do have some questions that I want to go in before. We often talk about this deck and the positioning of this deck. So in this matchup, what are our goals?
So against Sapphire Steel, we need to be aggressive. Sapphire Steel is a bit slow to start. Like, yes, they have ramp. That's not what I mean by slow. But they're not playing bodies early that can challenge. So if you can play a 1-drop into a 2-drop or a 1-drop into double 1-drop and gain a bunch of lore early, you're on your way. There was a point in time where Sapphire Steel was heavy on Spooky Sight. And in those cases, it's kind of convenient for us to have a lot of bodies on the board because it means that when Spooky Sight comes down, we get a lot of ink. And then we can kind of play our hand, dump our hand, refill our hand. So the key is really go as wide as you can. They usually can answer only one threat a turn, maybe 2 if they have like Strength for Raging Fire or Thunderbolt. So if you can play 2 or 3 bodies every turn, you're going to put yourself in a dominant position.
Quite fair. What are, with that in mind, what are we looking for in the altar?
In the altar, I want a 1-drop. I'm kind of indifferent which 1-drop it is here. And I want Timothy Mouse on 2 into either Tinkerbell on 3 or Lexington on 3.
Ideally Tinkerbell because you would get the extra lore?
Yes, Tinkerbell would proc the extra lore, and the fact that she can quest for 2 herself means that like her plus Timothy can get me 4 lore each turn if they're unanswered.
So what are the cards that we open with that we're getting rid of in the altar?
I don't want anything high on my curve. So ideally we have a 1-drop, 2-drop, 3-drop, and a Strength of a Raging Fire. Strength is really important because you want to be able to answer their Cinderella. Cinderella is their ideal turn 3/4 play. And if you don't answer it, then they get to go from 2 ink to 4 ink to 6 ink to 8 ink and drop Goliath, and then the game gets really awkward and hairy.
Fair enough. As you can see, the opening lines here in this game, you get to go Palace Guard. Is it arguable that Palace Guard is the best 1-drop in this matchup?
I think Palace Guard is very strong because he's a 1/4. There's not a lot of Fire the Cannons in this meta, which means that he is going to live, and if he gains you 2 or 3 lore, he's done his job. And you can kind of see here right now, like I'm turning both my 1-drop and my Calhoun sideways and saying deal with it and just gaining lore.
And this is really identifying the format itself, right? So knowing that on average, the only thing that Sapphire Steel wants to be doing on turn 3 is playing a Cinderella. So, I mean, your Calhoun is beyond live for that free lore there.
Yes.
And getting every lore in this matchup seems quite, important.
It's very important to gain lore early and as much as you can, arguably.
Yeah. Now here, it looks like, we talked about the opening line and how you wanted Timothy Mouse into Tinkerbell, and you didn't get any of those things.
I did not. It looks like I played Cheshire on 3, and then it looks like I played Dumbo for the next turn. I don't have Strength for Raging Fire, which means that Cinderella is going to get at least 2 procs, which feels kind of bad, if I'm being honest. But I recognize that I need to quest my characters and gain lore early and take advantage before something bad happens. It looks like in this case, Tinkerbell was that answer.
Yeah, nothing will slow you down faster than a Tinkerbell.
Yeah, Tink is definitely not great. That's also part of the reason why the evasives can be really strong in this matchup. Sapphire Steel doesn't have a lot of evasives. So not only is Dumbo drawing me a card and gaining me lore here, but he can't be hit by Tinkerbell.
I think someone was going to ask a question. Yes, feel free. Like someone unmute it and then mute it. No? Oh,
I just pressed the wrong buttons in the chat. That's my fault.
Oh, you're good. So notable there that he decided to take out your Cheshire Cat rather than the Dumbo. How do you feel about that play?
I was very excited to see that Dumbo lived. I understand why people are threatened by a Cheshire Cat and why he is such a hot target. Quite frankly, some of the reason that I play Cheshire on 3 in games is because people are very afraid of a Cheshire Cat because of the boosting and damage impact, which means that if they use a piece of removal on the Cheshire, it's one less piece of removal that they then have for my genies or my Dumbos. So it's awkward because I kind of lose my Bell effect, but it means that my evasive lives, which means I get to draw more cards, which is always a good thing.
So, Melissa, in that situation, does that feel the same as like when people played Diablos on 2 or 3, that sometimes you played them out knowing that it was just going to eat removal?
Yes, I think it's very similar to I'm going to bait your Let the Storm Rage on so that the next thing I play can live. If that's what you're alluding to.
Yeah, there's cards that are really good that if they stick, that's great. But they also feel sometimes they're just as important as getting out so I can then get to a point in the next turn or two where I feel comfortable playing the cards where I really need to turn the corner. And I thought that's what you were trying to say.
That is exactly what I'm trying to say, that if they answer the 3-drop that's valuable, it means the 4-drop is more likely to live. And you can see this Dumbo has already drawn, it looks like 2 or 3 cards, and it is still going unanswered.
Yeah, it was really on my next checklist here of like the key swing moments of the particular game, and I think that removing Cheshire Cat gave you 2 to 3 extra cards, 2 to 3 extra lore, just gave you the ability to kind of like build out, and Orion was never able to establish a Goliath, so he wasn't even like punishing you for drawing cards anyway, and now you have this like super wide board that obviously Tinkerbell is an issue because it creates a bunch of 2-for-1s, but it's also a board state in which you're pretty like just all in against them. So like Tinkerbell likely can only ever get a maximum of, like you're happy and then like a Calhoun. But then now because you have Demona established, you can actually really start making the board kind of angry.
Yeah, looking at this, I think my intention with sticking that Challenger Demona is eventually when I decide to beat going sideways, that Demona can kind of swing back and kind of play defense there.
Yeah, it's also clear that you're just waiting for a strength. Or in this case, in this list, you still had Thunderbolt.
I did have a Thunderbolt, so I was really waiting for either. I did not want to enable kind of a bunch of free trades. And at this point, kind of looking at that board, if anything besides Demona goes sideways, a lot of things get negatively wiped out.
I don't know. I actually think I want to contest that. I think that you may have been a little too patient in the game. Because
That's fair.
from this board state, the Tinkerbell is the only threat, but we both know that this is a deck that plays nothing but threats. So therefore, if he just like starts finding Hades and starts finding Vincenzo's, I think the game gets a lot worse for you. So I think at some point you were supposed to open up and start the questing because you had like I said, the Tinkerbell is only ever going to get one good challenge, and then from there you could have just wiped it out in any which way you felt necessary, and then move the game forward. Because if he turns Cinderella's and Mulan sideways, then your Calhouns get to just take them out anyway.
Right.
So I actually think that you might have been a little too like playing scared in this particular game.
That's fair.
But as we can see, it develops, and we had a Headless Horseman hit. So
yeah, Headless Horseman, it looks like hit 4 actions, so Demona got wiped.
Yeah.
I can't see what I played
I think
there.
you just played Hades, and then you're deciding on target, which just led to draw 2 cards.
Yep, so I draw more cards. It looks like I drew into Strength, maybe?
Yeah, with 18 characters in play. It's actually
It might just be Thunderbolt.
It might be both. I forget. But this is kind of like where the game gets to, is that you gained an extra 2 lore from the first Cobra. You were holding on to a Cobra for quite some time, and then didn't end up doing it with it. But this stalemate of a game seems to be like very break even, like at any given moment. And I'm just worried that the longer you wait in the matchup, things like this start to happen. Like, we just saw...
There's a Hades.
Yeah, the Hades came out. The last turn, it was a Headless Horseman. And now all of a sudden, Orion feels completely like free to kind of do these things.
So I think in my head, I was gaining ink and potential to draw cards. I'm not saying that's correct, but that's where my head went at the time, was like, I'm going to establish this big board and then kind of just like quest in 2 turns and get the remaining 11 lore.
Yeah, which is also fair. I mean, like, on this turn, if you wanted to turn sideways, you're looking at only 6 lore.
There's 6 lore there.
So
yeah.
6 lore to 15 is comfortable, but the characters that you play are, I think, I see the Diablo that
It's
goes
something
down.
and a Diablo.
So I think you're still really favorable into the board for the most part. So it feels like it's an okay time to say, hey, man, you got to figure it out. So
I think you see me thinking there because my finger was moving.
yeah, like I see a white rose in hand hanging out as well. But I think that's just like in my like I remember when I was watching the game live, I had said to myself, I'm like, I don't know, it seems difficult to sit still for this long because you're just like setting yourself up for him to just draw out of it. Whereas like if you force the action, it's a little more difficult. Like even here,
there's the Vincenzo.
Right, like he went
to Calhoun probably.
He went 3 turns in a row where he was able to remove a character and you just sat and did nothing. So I think you played a Tinkerbell last turn, so he might just hit the Tinkerbell here.
Oh, that seems likely.
But he does hit Calhoun. I'm pretty sure that Tinkerbell's next to the Hades.
That seems likely because I know I saw it in my hand there.
Yeah.
So he quests for 6 there, so he opens the board.
Yeah, and I think this is like kind of a turning point here too, because it's like, do we end up somehow gaining 11 lore on this turn?
Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Yeah, I think I Cobra and Rose, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. So hilariously, you get rewarded because you decided to finally turn sideways. But I think that you had the ability to do this like much earlier in the game, and then like. Because there was about 2 or 3 turns in the game where he didn't do anything.
And I could have just gained lore.
And you could have just been gaining lore, taking out the problems, and then like it would have been all okay. And I think you just would have established it a little bit quicker in the game rather than kind of like waiting it out. Because if you didn't draw exactly Cobra and Rose on this turn, the game definitely gets drug out another few turns.
The game gets drawn out. I'd probably hard cast that Thunderbolt and kind of challenge back a bit.
Yeah.
To gain some lore, but not be fully there.
Yeah. So it's really just about doing the thing. And this is all just like the decision making going on, the sequencing, like trying to figure out what is best. Because like it is notable that currently Sapphire Steel has no ways to interact with a large board, and they are on average going to do it for the 1-for-1s. But it also felt like the threats that you were adding to the board weren't enough. Now, granted, I think you're going to see it in Game 3, like a bit of a different game, because I do believe you get to go Tim Mouse into Tinkerbell in that game.
I believe so.
So, like, this is a game that you were on the play, and you had a suboptimal line, realistically.
And I definitely played more defensive there.
Yeah, and I think, right, like, I think that was, like, when I asked you at the start, like, hey, what are we in this? You told me you were the aggressor, but then you played as if you were kind of like the control deck.
Yeah, I think with what was in my hand, I didn't feel I could be super aggro. And so I took a more patience route.
Got a Hades question when you were done talking about the finish. Bring it on, Tom.
So I have found that Hades is extremely good on curve, but it doesn't feel the same because you normally, especially in a deck like Purple Steel, I don't have a ton of extra ink to play Hades and then play an answer in the same turn. Is there a time, or do you ever feel like Hades is too much at 3, or a time where it's not as valuable for you because it's not an answer if you're behind? Luckily, you weren't behind in that situation, but giving them the choice to make whether you draw the cards or remove the item, it takes the autonomy away from you as a player. Well, how do you feel about Hades in that situation and things?
So I think that Hades causes your opponents to have to really think about the position that they are in. And you're right, sometimes when you're behind, getting the cards isn't necessarily the right thing because you're keeping the threat on the board. But it also means that you're going 1 or 2 bodies wider to then kind of sing the strength that potentially you already had in your hand. So like there's positions where I play a Hades and I know my opponent's going to let me draw cards, and then I still remove that threat and I've gained 2 cards. So it's kind of a you have to force your opponent to have it type situation.
Yeah, to double down, I think...
Go
ahead, Tom.
No, go ahead. I'm listening.
Okay. So like basically what she said, I think a lot of time we're playing on the curve, and that's like what our deck does better than anything because we just have so many like repetitive cards at the different points. So on average, even when the deck had Strength and Thunderbolt, you would play the Hades on 5 first to see what your opponent would do, and almost always your opponent lets you draw the cards, but you probably already had the Strength or the Thunderbolt to answer the card you wanted to anyway, so therefore you get to put a 3/4 into play that gains lore and sings, but it also gives you the ability to like just recoup your hand, and if they banish the card, great. That means now you have the removal for the next threat that they play. And if they let you draw the cards, you just get to let your opponent. So even when you're behind, the card still feels good enough because if you get rid of a threat, great. If you draw 2 cards, you're probably drawing 2 cards closer to the answer that you need to get back in the game anyway.
And the fact of the matter is, after turn 5, like, we want to be playing 3-drop, 2-drop, 3-drop, 3-drop. And so drawing the cards kind of fits into that game plan, lets you dig your deck more, find either your burn or your dock or your genie to kind of be explosive.
Gotcha. I haven't played a lot of Purple Steel at all in this meta, or actually ever since the shift with Fabled. So, like, that's good to hear from that side. I've played that Hades with some Blurple matchups and some like red purple leading up to and before packs, and it sometimes just feels like there's not an answer if I don't I don't have the heavy removal like Steel does. Sometimes Hades just feels like, yeah, I'm getting a great value for getting that 3/4 and the draw, but it feels really bad on 7 ink because I can't repopulate my board in the same turn.
Big agree.
It looks like AJ asked a question as well.
Yeah, I was going to try and get to the gameplay before we
Okay.
go too derivative. All right, so this game was pretty much the absolute Sapphire Steel game.
Oh, yes. He just had it all.
Right. So, well, it's not even about having all. It's like this is what the deck wants to do. So you had kind of your worst 1-drop potentially in Happy.
Yep.
Into Calhoun, into Cobra, which you did in a way again kind of bait the Cobra, because the Cobra ended up eating a Thunderbolt, which means your genie here gets the quest and live on, or and hopefully you can draw into something that like make it a little bit better. Of course, now your setup board here ends up with a Horseman, and then the Horseman comes down, and the game might start to look pretty over pretty quickly. Because
playing this game, I remember as soon as Tinkerbell hit the field, I was just like, I feel dead.
Right. We've had a lot of conversations with Tinkerbell, and specifically in this matchup, because you had a game against Tinkerbell this weekend also where I was like, oh no, like we played in the Tinkerbell. But I think the moment the Tinkerbell hit, the game was probably over, because it meant that the Goliath was going to let Orion just like run away with the game with more ink than you and kind of just like answering everything you're doing.
And I can't go sideways.
Yeah, and you just can't go sideways because Tinkerbell. So like you just get into this really awkward board state. But this is like 100% the type of game that this deck can lose.
Yeah, I think when Sapphire Steel's ideal curve is maybe a 1-drop, maybe just ink pass into either Tipo or Sail, into Cinderella, into Tinkerbell, arguably,
or just Goliath.
Yeah,
right.
like you just want to be hitting that 2-4-6 and 2-4-6 on top of having the Thunderbolt, on top of having the Strength of a Raging Fire. I just didn't feel that I ever really stood a chance because I kind of knew what my opponent was trying to do, and they were finding all of their pieces to do so.
Yeah, basically every turn here, he just had an answer.
Yes.
Like in this turn, he removes, 2 genies. The game is basically over.
Yeah, he's at 10, I'm at 6, and we both have like 2 cards because we can't keep more than that.
Yeah, and he also has
a jillion ink.
over 20 willpower in play. So like,
yes,
there's just a bunch of cards here that like aren't going to go right for you. And I think you've already identified like, okay, I might be dead.
Yes, I definitely identified that early in that game.
May have missed it before I joined, but looking at the list above, you have gone less Carson 1 droppy Is this because the list is more for anyone to pick up for skill expression and comfortability? What are your other cards you'd want as a one of?
So I embraced the one-ofs because I kind of wanted to see what cards were good and or bad. And in the 3K, as well as playing the next weekend at PAX Unplugged, I felt as though certain cards I wanted to be more than a one of, specifically the White Rose. And I also felt that other one ofs weren't really serving purpose in the deck. So I just kind of started to adapt it to how I felt the meta was shaking out and what would give me the best position to succeed in. I would say it's less about kind of skill expression or anyone to pick up. Quite frankly, I think a bunch of one ofs in a deck like this is totally fine because we draw so many cards that it gives you flexibility. But I wanted to kind of secure extra burn so that I could close out games because I felt that in 30, 40 games of play, burn and kind of just instant lore was so that important.
Yeah, notable thing I often say is success leaves clues. There was just way too many games in which White Rose was the defining card in a matchup.
Yeah.
And we could argue that having one of them and always having it was pretty lucky. So therefore, giving your opportunity to actually always have it is kind of a big deal. A lot of these matchups are coming really close. They're coming down to the wire where you're hoping to stick a character that's going to gain you lore, but there's so much removal at the top end of gameplay with Hades, Vincenzo, the Prince Philip combo. There's just a bunch of ways to interact with characters as the game goes on, as opposed to early on. That's why you see aggro decks still kind of being successful because there's just less interaction to them. But as the game goes later and later, and you're trying to be this aggressive deck that's going to win a grindy matchup, the ways that Amethyst Steel has to do that are Cobra and are White Rose. So that's kind of where they end up really shining, is that you saw in game one, the difference of 5 lore was gained because of Cobra and because of White Rose, and I believe in the game we're about to see is kind of the same, where she just ends the game because of those cards.
I also know that my feature against the Emerald Sapphire, they did not respect the fact that I had enough ink to basically go Cobra Rose Cobra or some combination of those things to win the game.
Yeah, so there's a lot going on there. So I think you saw kind of a bad Amethyst Steel game on the play that was able to win and close out. I think you saw a great Sapphire Steel play. I mean, basically every single turn of the game was drop a bomb, sing a song, and remove a character. I don't think you could ask for a better hand from Sapphire Steel in game 2, which is exactly why you lost. There was also a moment in time where Melissa quest just to get lore, and I'd argue that the lore was free. And the reason why the lore is free is because the moment that Orion takes his 2 lore and 3 lore characters and starts challenging and isn't gaining lore, it actually gives you opportunity to get back in the game. Orion is not the type of player that's going to fall for the trap, so he used all his cards the way he's supposed to, but still gained 5 lore in a turn. But against every player, that might not be true. They might have taken a turn off to challenge your characters, which gives you opportunity to kind of get back in the game. And I think that's also notable that she identified hey, where I am in the game, I have to make sure my opponent doesn't gain 5 lore as much as it's important for me to gain 2 or 3 lore.
So it looks like here I start with Diablo, which is fine. Quest and Spellbook to draw a card. It looks like I played Black Heron there, which is definitely not the ideal 2-drop, but arguably we don't really have a bad 2-drop in the deck. They all gain lore. They all have stats.
Yeah, I agree.
And Orion went Sail into Mulan there, which means Diablo is no longer free to quest, depending on what else is in my hand.
Yeah, which is arguable. I mean, sometimes you might need the card, sometimes you might need the strength number.
Right, it depends what line I'm going for.
Yeah, on average, if you assume that their turn 4 is just going to be Cinderella, you can still quest with Diablo as long as we're playing a 3-drop.
Yes.
Because then we can just play Genie on 4 and then sing and remove the Cinderella anyway, so the strength number isn't as important. And on average, we have to go from 3 to 5. So that's a little bit more difficult to do as well, while not gaining any lore from Diablo. Specifically knowing that your Black Heron can also just trade out the
Oh,
one
I
drop.
remember this hand. I hated this hand. I didn't have ink. My ink was Strength of a Raging Fire.
Okay.
And I didn't want to ink it.
Fair.
So then I chose to ink the 3-drop, which was Cheshire. And I go 3 wide. And he plays Kita, who can't be strengthed.
And then you draw second strength, but have to ink strength.
Correct. But I play a genie, so I'm 4 wide. I draw a card. And I tell him that if he wants to make the trade, he can make the trade. The reason I do that is if he is using Kita to swing into Black Heron, he's not ramping with Kita.
Correct.
So he Thunderbolts Genie and plays, is that Goliath?
No, Jasmine.
Jasmine. That makes sense.
Because he didn't ramp with Kita.
Yep.
So you still kind of got what you wanted.
So I Hades there, and I give him the choice. He takes it away because he recognizes that giving me cards is bad.
Yeah, and then you actually get to eat Kita.
Which was great.
I agree.
And I gained 2 lore because I used Calhoun.
Yeah, 100% agree. So this is a weird game. I think that it's really difficult for him to not let you draw cards there. But I think, like, based on his hand, he kind of just had to.
Right, and then, like, he Thunderbolts because he didn't have another play.
Yeah, notable, you also got a free lore with Diablo there.
Yes. I believe I go Lexington Dock here, so I start to go wide, which is what I want to do. And then I just turn sideways.
Yeah. What's funny is that you ended up inking both strengths.
I had to.
Right, but, like, the not inking the first one could have cost you, because if you had just put the Cheshire and Cat, it's arguable that you would have been in a better position.
Yeah.
It's just tough to see that.
I know. I remember thinking that looking back, but in the moment I only had the 1 strength, and I didn't want to ink the 1.
Yeah.
But then, like, I drew Calhoun into Genie.
Yeah, and then the game just gets out of hand here. And this is funny again, because I think we had, like, the big display here is that in game 2, Orion had the best possible hand and kind of wipes the floor and wins the game. But in games 1 and 3 on the play, Melissa didn't even have all of the best cards that she would want to kind of, like, compete in the matchup, and, like, it looks like it's a 20-0 situation.
Like, I still just make the best out of the cards that are in my possession. Like, here, I think I just go wide.
Yeah, why not?
Tinkerbell and Black Heron. And then Elsa Conquest. 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, and a rose is in hand. Again.
Yeah. Yeah, and obviously Cinderella is not at all the card he wants here. He doesn't even decide to use the Cinderella effect. I forget why. I think it's like a Hades in his hand.
I think he had Hades in his hand. I remember him telling me after the fact that he was a little unclogged. And so he was, like, trying to make the best of it.
Yeah. And you just kind of close it out.
Yeah. So, like, even there, I don't even get to display, like, I'll say ideal lines and value.
Yeah.
But it showcases the flexibility of Amethyst Steel in really just using all of our cards to their advantage when you have them.
Yeah, big true. All right, so we're going to pause here. We're going to open this back up. Vince had a question about deck building. Deck building wise, have you considered Elephant or which is Magical Maneuvers, to be able to bounce the cat for Presidio card draw or Rose Cobra replay?
Elephant's a card that I've thought about. I think it goes in kind of that one-up spot that the Demona is in right now. It's probably something we could test and see if it fits better. Being able to bounce cards in general is always very strong. And if you are boosting Cheshire, it means that when you bounce the Cheshire, you could potentially get 2, 3, 4 cards to hand rather than just the Cheshire. I've always been someone who doesn't really like bouncing recently because I don't like making my board smaller. I want to be able to go wide and deal with it. The exception to kind of going wide, I would say, is when you're playing against Emerald with Prince Philip, because you need to be able to kind of refill after their combo takes off. But otherwise, I found that things like Magical Maneuvers or Elephant often make you kind of smaller on your board, and then it means that your opponents have more ways to answer you, which to me is kind of anti what the deck is trying to do.
Good enough answer, Judge. I hope so.
Yep.
That being said, I know there's a lot of people playing the one-drop Olaf for a similar reason. Because when Olaf is removed from play, you get to bring something back to hand. And so people are saying, like, okay, my one-drop is gone, I'll take my Cheshire back that way. So I think that's another kind of compromise people can make if that's what they want to do.
Yeah, it's also notable that in this particular matchup, Olaf is almost always going to be able to do that.
Right.
Because, like, it depends. Like, you likely will not have the opportunity to boost your Cheshire Cat in a world where on turn 4 they're playing Tinkerbell, because your turn 1 is an Olaf, your turn 2 is whatever it is, your turn 3 is Cheshire Cat, and then like their turn 4 is Tinkerbell, which is banishing your Olaf,
Right.
which means you didn't actually have any time to do it. So the first Olaf isn't even good enough, and even by the time you would be able to play an elephant is also very slow. So like even in most of those positions, like it feels difficult to where you even have the opportunity to like really get that off, which is where like kind of I am with it. I do think that like magical maneuvers is more interesting just because it's cheaper, and on average we've discussed already how like we get to a point in game state where we want to play a 3 and a 2 more often than not, or a 3 and a 3. So like in any world where we could exert something down and pick up a cat that like already did a thing, it seems okay if like it works out.
There's also a world with Ruby Amethyst on the rise that magical maneuvers also helps with targeting Yagos.
Sure.
So like maybe that's something to consider depending on where the meta shakes in the next 2 to 3 weeks.
Yeah, I think it also depends if the deck can go back to fire the cannons, because
Agreed.
since you have so many like 1 strength, 4 willpower characters, hilariously fire the cannons ends up being like quote good enough into Diablos. It gets rid of pesky Lumieres. So like I think that that's like definitely another matchup that's on the rise, and who's deciding which is best is kind of like a good debate right now. And I think that for a very long period of time, this deck has been designed to kind of interact with more Sapphire decks than it has like other Amethyst decks. But it's not to say that the position of the deck can't change, because there's just so much utility in card choice that you can very easily go either way.
I agree with that. I think one of the things that's always drawn me to Amethyst Steel is the fact that we can change 3 cards in the deck, or we can change 30 cards in the deck and it still performs.
Yeah.
So flexibility based on meta shakeup is always relevant.
This deck is down on Doc, but Kylie still asked the question of like, is there a time where you don't need to use Doc's ability and we just slam it?
There are. There are times where you might need the dock for a Strength of a Raging Fire count, and the 2-drop is just good enough. There are times you might have double dock, and so you can either kind of pitch it with a Cobra, or you can just play it to play it. It's really hard for me to put a rule around when you play a dock for value versus when we play a dock without value. So it kind of becomes I need to judge this based on where I am in the game mentality. And I recognize that that's not the most helpful answer. But if people have examples of when they would do that, I'm happy to kind of chime in.
Yeah, I think it's mostly just an understanding of like what is necessary for the game state, and unfortunately you can't necessarily teach that. It's closer to just saying like, yeah, I just need a 1/3, I just need a body, I just need stats. My hand's not very good, so I might just have to be willing to get rid of cards that aren't helpful just to draw the cards that are.
Like if you have a dock in your hand and you know that you're playing Demona 6 the next turn, then and you have 2 extra ink, then sure, you can play a 3-drop and a 2-drop, because we know that the next turn is ink, play Demona, exert, draw 3.
Correct. So like just putting the character in play is beneficial because you're going to draw 3 cards anyway. We didn't really get to see it showcased in this one because I felt like the games that you won, you were ahead and you didn't really come from behind in either of them. But what are some of like the mechanics to this deck in this matchup that we would be looking for if we're trying to like come back from, you know, a bit of a drought early on?
Yeah, I think Cheshire Cat plays a really strong piece in that, given the fact that he basically gives us a pseudo Fire the Cannons or a pseudo Bell, kind of dependent on what the board state is. to allow you to put bodies into play and remove characters that are upright from your opponent's side. I also think that Elsa 5 is always very relevant because her tap and rush ability lets us take out a character who may have been upright or finish off a different character. The fact that Elsa is a 2/5 means that she can hold damage, so she can kind of swing into a Sapphire Hades or something else to kind of help without being banished herself. I think the newest addition is the legendary Demona, in the fact that when you play her, you get to exert your opponent's board. So if, let's say, I had a matchup this past weekend where I was playing against Amber Steel, and they knew they couldn't turn sideways because I had Black Heron, Calhoun, Lexington. I had stats down. So anytime they quested, their whole board was going to be wiped. And I drew the Demona, and I sat there thinking to myself, because I was on 7 ink, or like turn 7, is it worth playing because I'm going to give them cards because they're top decking? And my answer to myself ended up being yes, for 2 reasons. One, I got to draw 3 cards, which meant that I got to advance my own gameplay. 2, they were in a standstill, which meant that they now turn sideways and I get to remove their threats and still keep my characters on the board. And it completely flipped the matchup, I would say.
Okay. So I'm going to ask Melissa one more question, then I'm going to give everyone the opportunity to follow up. So you have a few minutes to think about it as she's going through it here. So this was kind of our opening weekend tournament. Since then, we have played this deck a ton. We've played this matchup a lot more. How would you say that the matchup has evolved over the last several weeks with like the addition of Ariel as an example? That's a card that we're kind of seeing now. We're seeing less spooky sites in decks. I guess just talk me through your recent weekend and things of like the matchups you're seeing and like maybe what was different to start that we have to kind of look forward to now and changes.
Yeah, so Sonic Warrior Ariel is definitely a pesky beast. She has stats for starters.
She's a 3/8.
Like she's a 3/8.
Big girl.
She's huge. And she obviously has that ability with comboed with steel decks that when you're singing a song, you can pay to deal damage. So keeping Ariel around in a world where we have X3s in our deck feels very intimidating. I would argue that I used Elsa 5 a lot this weekend to tap down Ariel Sonic Warrior as soon as she came in. Now, luckily, we are a stats-heavy deck right now. We have Lexingtons, we have Black Herons, we have Calhouns, and we have Cobras.
And Demona.
And Hades.
Yeah.
So I felt that I was in a position where I could take a turn off to swing 3 bodies into Ariel because I was not losing all of my bodies while doing so, and it was taking away kind of the threat and power that she had. And it's a hard position to be in because we don't always want to be the challenging deck. Sometimes we do, but if you're making unfavorable trades, it can feel bad. So you kind of have to make sure that you're taking out what I would say is kind of the pesky targets while focusing on how you yourself are going to gain the lore. Without Spooky Sight, we don't always have as much ink. I'd say when we were playing in the TFM 3K tournament, every Sapphire game that I was playing, I had between 9 and 14 ink. And I probably only inked myself up to 5. But I play a low curve, so when a Spooky Sight comes down, I gain anywhere from an additional 2 to 5 ink, putting me in a position where I can play my entire hand, draw more cards, and still refill. That is obviously less possible if we're not seeing Spooky Sights. I did still see some Spooky Sights at PAX Unplugged this weekend, but I think it was kind of less in numbers. With potentially less Sapphire, there's world to think if Timothy Mouse plus Tinkerbell makes sense, because I think the reason that we had them in there was to be the aggressor and gain early lore. And so if we're in a meta where that's not as relevant, we have to consider if that's the route we still want to take, or if we need to kind of put statistics, like stat cards in there to fight back. So that's kind of where my head's at right now.
Quite fair. Anyone have any questions before we wrap it up?
I have one.
Yeah.
So in gameplay, so not this color combination, if you're going against an emerald deck and you know you have to work around combo player for the Prince Philip line, in the purple decks I was playing, I was heavily relying on holding back a Demona to just tap the Tiny Phillips and just close out the game before they can get to 9 ink plus character. So they didn't have the shift option. With only 2 Demonas, what is the game plan with it? I'm imagining it's some sort of holding back like a critical mass point, so whenever they do it, you can just drop out 3-4 characters. But I just wanted to hear what your thoughts on that type of interaction was.
So I think there's 2 different answers, and so I'll tackle both of them. The first,
I agree with that answer, by the way.
The first one is we want to hold back card draw and be aggressive. So if I know I'm playing against an emerald deck, ideally you have like your 1-drop into the Timothy Mouse, into the evasive Tinkerbell, into Genie. And so you're just saying, I quest for 1, then I quest for another 5, then I quest for anywhere from 4 to 7, dependent on if they're interacting with my board.
Which on average they are not capable of.
Right, because they're so focused on, I need to ramp to 9, and that's all I'm focused on doing.
Yeah.
So in that case, I'm just saying, I'm going to gain lore early. As I see you either approaching 9 ink or sticking a shift, I'm going to be cognizant of how wide I am, so that if a wipe happens, I can redeploy and kind of reset myself.
To double on that real quick, it's also about understanding what they can actually remove without the combo. So if you don't need to play another character to like win the game, you probably shouldn't, is like the easiest answer. You know, if you count up the lore and you're like, oh, I already have 20 based on the cards in my hand and the cards in play, there's just zero reason to add to the board in the event that there is a board wipe, because most of the decks that are trying to do the Prince Philip combo, the characters that they have in play aren't interacting very well and challenging and things like that. So I think that's a real keynote too, is just like understanding how much lore is present and like what is required to the gamble, you know, the 50-50 I would call it, of like, all right, you know, I'm going to be able to get to 16 next turn. I have a Crowbar in my hand, and I have this 2-lore character. Like, do I want to say, hey, they have to have it this turn, or do I have to, like, kind of just hope that we get there without it? I think that's, like, very difficult, and in most cases, if I'm being completely honest with you, I would roll a dice. Because it's a 50-50 answer, and the answer is, like, not always true, not always false. And therefore, like, sometimes you got to make the gamble, sometimes you get burnt, sometimes you don't. But if you don't make the play, you might also lose the game. So every turn that you give them the opportunity to do something, it becomes more difficult. So it's one of those, like, feels situation. And if you want to remove feeling, not kidding, roll a dice, odd or evens on the table, and, like, let fate decide it.
The other thing that I would say is it's very notable that your opponent has to have a way to play a Prince Philip either shifted for 6 or like hard playing for 9, and they need to have a way to sing Melissa Mean and Scary for 3. So if you're in a position where you don't see a baby Philip, if you can remove whatever body they have and then all they can do is play Prince Philip, that feels a lot better than them being able to sing Melissa Mean and Scary and play the Prince Philip. So like you're putting them in a position that, sure, maybe your Elsa who already had Rush is wiped, but your 4 other characters are not being wiped because they had no way to deal damage to them. So yes, they are putting a 6/6 that quests for 3 into play, but I still have 4 characters that are questing for 7 combined. So like it's very much similar to when I was playing Amber Emerald Dogs, and you're evaluating like what can my opponent do with the ink and the statistics that they have, kind of gauging the situation to say like I'm not relying on untapping your shifted or your warded character and just swinging into it, but instead saying I'm just presenting more lore and you have to deal with it.
Any last questions?
I do have one more if nobody else does.
Have it.
Okay. So Purple Steel has so many good cards. Like more than just what's reflected in your deck list. And
Yeah.
I've seen decks go for more on the consistency side and trying to get it as close to a 2-line special and Dreamborn as possible. And then I've seen deck lists where they have had a whole big helping of the Frank Karsten Kool-Aid and is down to like 3 to 4 lines on Dreamborn, trying to toolbox and have as many one-ofs as possible. And I see the allure of both, because you have the consistency side that makes things more I guess for lack of a better term, more consistent in your matchups. But then I see the other side where your opponent never knows what you're going to be able to pull out of your hat in any given situation, just because how many good cards exist. When looking to pick up this deck for gameplay wise, which strat would you start with? Which would you lean more towards? Is there a meta reason from one or the other? Like, what are your thoughts on that type of style when building and playing this deck?
I think that if it's an ink combination that you're less familiar with, you should start with something more consistent. It's really important to get a foundational understanding of how the deck plays and what the kind of key cards are. And knowing that you can ink that card and still see it again, I think gives you a better understanding of what's going on. As you, I would say, advance your gameplay with that ink combination and understand how to kind of play the different matchups and what cards are strong into certain ink combinations and weak into other, that's where you can kind of start toolboxing, in my opinion, because you don't have to say, this is my 1-drop, this is my 2-drop, this is my 3-drop. Like, you watched me against Sapphire Steel there play suboptimal lines and kind of navigate out of it. I had a matchup this past weekend where I was on the draw in the mirror and I missed a 1-drop, but I was able to kind of outskill and draw out of it because I had kind of toolboxy cards in there. So I think that as you gain more and more understanding, you can go that route. I'll also admit that I'm somebody who was very anti one-ofs for a very, very long time because
Can confirm.
I said I want consistency and I want to know that I'm going to see the cards that are going to allow me to win. As I've gained more comfort in the game, I've pivoted that strategy because I believe in my ability to adapt on the fly and work with the cards I'm given versus know that I have 4-ofs of everything.
Just to add on, I think that it's solely based on your own skill level and understanding of the game. And, Frank Karsten is a 30-year-old pro, so his ability of understanding of any game that he plays is at such a higher level than the average player in the game that he can kind of get away with and do with what he wants. I also believe the altar in this game allows for a ton of opportunity cost. I also believe there's a lot of cards in the game that achieve this opportunity cost. Amethyst Steel is not in particular one of the decks that I would say truly leverages the ability to play one-ofs, because while it does maintain like card draw, it's not even the best ability or best ways to do it. Like specifically this deck currently doesn't have Mulan in it as an example, which would be another additional way to say like, hey, I can draw even more cards and filter through the cards in the deck that I want. And maybe there's a world where that is correct moving forward and Diablo starts to look worse. I think there's still a lot that can be gained and positioned. But for this deck in particular, the answer will always be, what is the position of the deck and how do you kind of like navigate the metagame with it? And I think that that's like the hardest takeaway, is that right now it feels like this is like basically the predator of the metagame. It's been the most played deck. It's been the most consistent deck. It has the most conversions. So it's kind of doing everything at once in the metagame. And like while it's that, it still doesn't it doesn't really need to play defense yet. It doesn't need to really alter its own natural game plan because most decks still haven't figured out how to interact with it. So I think as long as that's where you are in the metagame, you can kind of just do whatever you want in a big way. If it turns out, again, I keep saying this about other decks, but if people start playing bad cards, like Sisu Daring Visitor, that kind of makes the math a little bit worse. If your 2-drop Timothy Mouse is getting banished by their 3-drop character, or your 3-drop character is being banished by their 3-drop character, then all of a sudden, you probably can't play these cards, right? Like, if that card starts showing up in decks, we can't be playing 2-drop 1/4s and 3-drop 1/3s. It's just not going to work out. So that's the time where, if they're making a shift, if Ruby's going to make the shift to play that card, then I'm like, okay, now we need to identify, what other options do we have. And there's plenty, if I'm being honest. You can just take Timothy Mouse and Tinkerbell out of this deck, and you can just go to playing Raja and playing Lawrence, and it's almost the same thing.
Yep.
So it's not difficult for this deck to make a change on the fly to interact in any which way to position yourself. So the final question I'm going to leave Melissa on, because I'm actually curious on the answer here, and then we're going to wrap up completely. Melissa, we have been seeing versions of this deck without Doc Bold Knight.
Yes.
Thoughts?
I personally do not like having no docs in the deck. My reasoning for that is against a lot of the meta, we need the ability to kind of go wide, which means that the top end of our deck is not as valuable. So against Sapphire decks, I find myself inking Demona a lot, or inking Elsa because it's not as relevant. And if I'm inking something like Demona, that means I have, in my case, 2 less abilities to draw up to 6 cards. So therefore, I need a way to say I go 2-drop, 3-drop, 2-drop, and kind of refill my hand. I also think that early in the meta, given Spooky Sight was very prevalent, Doc really let us just play our hand, refill our hand, and be able to just constantly do that. Yes, we could previously do that when we were playing on 5 or 6 ink, but when I have 10 to 12 ink, I can go Genie into Lexington into Doc, draw cards, and be able to respond the next turn with 2 cards plus what I draw for turn. So I just think that being able to potentially trigger him is important enough to play him. We have ways to discard. We have Cobras. So if I draw Doc and he's irrelevant, I will just pitch him with Cobra.
Checks out for me. I wanted to take this time to thank everyone that showed up today. You are important to the point of this roundtable. This is, again, it's a new addition that we're adding to the Climber tier here on Metafy, just as a way to get in and have the ability to chat with you guys for an hour. I think it's really important to kind of continue to grow the community. I think it's really important for you guys to be able to interact with one another, be a part of chat, giving a little more livelihood about specific matchups. We'll continue to put out polls. This time I kind of went with what we had and I knew we were going to be able to use. But, I'm also up for just putting whatever you want, hitting up with a ping, even in this chat right now. If there's a matchup that you want to see covered, next week, then, hey, hit me up in chat, let us know. And hopefully we continue to do this. The reason why I think Tuesdays will work best is because in December, there's basically 2 Thursdays that are holidays. So therefore, it's kind of difficult. We're also leaving for trips on Thursdays. So that also makes it more difficult. So hopefully Tuesday is a day that we can move forward this and kind of continue it moving. So thank you guys so much. We're going to end the video. And yeah, we'll see you guys again next week.
Thanks, everyone.